This is the brief on the fundamental PMP concept, from project to product, scope, life cycles, value, and governance. This stuff is absolutely crucial for your PMP prep because it's all about this huge strategic shift we're seeing. Organizations are moving away from temporary, fixed-scope projects and more toward managing work as these ongoing systems of continuous value. So let's break down the 3 key ideas you need to nail. First, it's the core mindset shift from output to outcome. A project is temporary, right? It delivers a fixed output, like a finished piece of software. But here's the thing. That output hasn't delivered any real value yet. A product, on the other hand, is ongoing. It's all about the sustained outcome. You know, the customer satisfaction and market share that happens long after that initial project is done. Second, let's clear up those nested life cycles because they can be confusing. At the very top, you've got the big, strategic product life cycle, the PLC. Tucked inside that is the engine, the product development life cycle, or PDLC. And the smallest piece? That's the project life cycle. It's just a temporary tactical tool used inside the PDLC for specific major changes. And finally, this whole approach totally flips how we think about scope. For a project, scope is fixed up front with strict change control. Change is a risk. But for a product, scope is flexible and emergent, managed via a backlog based on user feedback. Here, adaptation is celebrated. So governance shifts too, away from rigid control gates to a value delivery system, where teams are empowered to just focus on delivering benefits. Mastering this shift from fixed outputs to flexible, sustained outcomes is the essential element of modern value delivery.
Okay, let's unpack this shift that every manager, especially if you're studying for your PMP, really needs to understand right now. We're talking about the move from project to product. And look, if you look back at management history, this is arguably the single most significant conceptual change we've seen since, since the early 20th century introduced scientific management.
It truly is a paradigm shift. It's not just a new buzzword. We're seeing a systemic change required to thrive in what people call the age of software. We're basically migrating organizations away from this legacy mindset, where success meant delivering a temporary, fixed output on time and on budget.
A model that was perfect for construction or engineering.
Exactly. And we're moving to a world where success demands sustained value creation, continuous improvement, and an unyielding customer focus.
So our mission today is to clarify the central point of confusion we see constantly, especially for people prepping for the exam. It's those 3 life cycles that all sound the same: the project life cycle, the product development life cycle, and the big one, the overarching product life cycle.
They're all related, but they are absolutely distinct.
We need to figure out how they're nested, who governs them, and how the PMBOK 7th edition standard explicitly demands this pivot toward long-term organizational worth.
That's the key. This deep dive is about giving you that strategic leverage to connect all those moving pieces. It's a transition from seeing your work as a series of finished events projects to managing continuous investment in assets. And, that's how the project manager survives and becomes a strategic enabler in the modern organization.
Okay, so let's start at the beginning. The legacy model, the project mindset. What defines a traditional project? It's a temporary endeavor with a defined start and a defined end, focused on delivering specific bounded outputs.
And traditionally, the metric for success was that iron triangle.
Yeah.
Scope, time, and cost. If you hit those baselines, the project was a success. Full stop. If the bridge was built on budget, the project manager won, even if the town later decided, they didn't really need the bridge.
And the moment we try to apply that legacy model to software and digital services, we just introduce massive digital friction. Our sources highlight 2 really catastrophic dysfunctions. The first one is the handoff problem.
The handoff problem is devastating, especially to institutional knowledge. The project team, often contractors or temporary people, they just dissolve when the project is done. The work gets thrown over the wall to a maintenance team that has zero context about the initial design decisions.
We've all seen that, right? That moment 3 months after launch when the system breaks and the team that built it is already working on another continent.
Yeah, it's terrible for continuity.
And the second dysfunction is incentive misalignment, which really hits the budget. The project manager is incentivized just to hit that deadline, which often means taking shortcuts, accumulating technical debt.
And here's the core issue. Since that team dissolves, they don't bear the interest payments on that debt. The future product maintenance team does. They end up managing what is essentially a depreciating asset. It was built, and then it immediately begins decaying. The temporary contract just poisons the incentives.
Which is where the new model, the product mindset, radically changes the game. A product is ongoing. It solves a customer need, generates continuous value, and it requires continuous investment. It's an appreciating asset.
And the success metric completely flips. We stop asking, did we hit the deadline?
Yeah.
And we start asking, what is the life cycle ROI? Is the customer actually using it? Is it driving the benefits we predicted?
And the core difference, and I think this is key, lies in how we treat requirements. In the project world, changing requirements are scope creep. It's a huge negative you have to fight.
Right. But in the product world, changing requirements are seen positively. They're defined as validated learning, as adaptation to market reality. You want to learn and pivot quickly based on what customers are telling you.
And that's only possible because of the cornerstones of this model: persistent, cross-functional teams.
Exactly. They own the product for its entire life cycle. They develop deep context, they maintain quality, and critically, they are the ones who fix what they break. That ensures immediate responsibility and just, well, a much higher quality output.
So if we agree that this temporary contract poisons the incentives, how do we establish a permanent one? It seems like we have to shift our strategic time horizon, which requires us to understand the hierarchy of those three distinct life cycles. This really is the core PMP trap we need to untangle.
We absolutely need a metaphor for this hierarchy, or the acronyms PrLC, PDLC, PLC will just blend together into alphabet soup. So think of the product lifecycle, PLC, as the solar system. It's the highest, most strategic container that dictates the rules of engagement and the strategic gravity of everything else.
That makes sense. So the PLC is driven purely by market performance and value. It's the business cycle that can span years or decades, moving through those classic stages: introduction, growth, maturity, and then decline.
And those stages are so critical for governance. For instance, applying the governance of the growth stage, which is high risk, heavy marketing spend, fast pivots, applying that to a stable maturity product like a core banking mainframe would be catastrophic. Governance for the PLC rests with strategic steering committees, portfolio managers, the people who decide if the product still deserves ongoing investment.
Okay, so the product lifecycle defines the market strategy. Nested inside that, we find the product development lifecycle, PDLC. Using your analogy, that would be the engine orbiting the sun.
Correct. The PDLC is the continuous iterative engine of execution. It's the end-to-end process of creating and refining the product itself. The loop is constant. Concept, design, build, test, launch, and then post-launch analysis, which feeds right back into the next idea.
So it's similar to the software development lifecycle, the SDLC.
It is, but the PDLC is a bit broader. It encompasses business validation, user testing, market readiness. The governance here is focused on the product owner and, ensuring adherence to development standards and quality.
And that leaves us with the smallest container, the most tactical one, the project lifecycle, PrLC. So in this analogy, it's like a temporary vehicle, maybe a SpaceX launch, that gets a specific payload into orbit.
Perfect analogy. The PrLC uses those classic PMI phases: initiation, planning, execution, monitoring and controlling, and closing. Projects are temporary vehicles used only to execute major, unique, time-box changes within that larger, continuous product lifecycle.
Can you give us a concrete example of that nested reality, just to make it crystal clear?
Certainly. So imagine a persistent product team. They're operating in continuous PDLC mode, constantly developing and iterating on features for their product. But then a major high-risk, bounded undertaking comes up, say, a massive regulatory overhaul like new GDPR compliance standards.
Or migrating the entire platform to a new cloud provider, something with a clear end date.
Exactly. That work is highly suitable for a temporary PrLC. It has a clear end state and a defined success metric. Once that migration or compliance work is complete, the project closes, but the product continues its life cycle, seamlessly absorbing the output.
Okay, that makes sense. Now let's pivot to scope, because that acts as the control anchor for this entire system. For traditional PMPs, the shift from a fixed project scope to a flexible product scope is often the biggest mental hurdle to get over.
That's a critical distinction to make. Project scope is fundamentally bounded. It's defined by the WBS, the work breakdown structure, and the schedule. It focuses on execution constraints. And the project manager guards this scope fiercely, managing changes through formal change requests, because changing the scope means changing the contract.
But product scope is completely different. It's expansive and dynamic. It's defined by customer needs and features, and it focuses on customer viability and market adoption. The guardian here is the product manager, managing it via the backlog.
And this fundamentally flips the famous iron triangle on its head. Traditional project management always tried to fix the scope. In the modern product model, time and cost, which is really just the persistent team's capacity, are often fixed, and scope becomes the variable. We continuously deliver as much value as we can within the fixed capacity we have.
I have to ask the critical question here, the one I'm sure every listener managing resources is asking. Doesn't that make the product owner too powerful? If they get continuous funding and total scope flexibility, how does the organization make sure they aren't just hoarding resources for a pet project that isn't delivering any real ROI?
That is a fantastic question. And that is precisely why the PMBOK 7th edition introduced the system for value delivery. PMI understands that simply delivering an output, finishing a project, doesn't guarantee success. We need governance structures to ensure those outputs lead to measurable benefits.
Let's break down that outcome chain, because this is absolutely central to the PMP focus on value.
The chain is explicit. Projects deliver deliverables like a new software feature. Those deliverables should enable measurable outcomes, for instance, faster customer task completion. Those outcomes, in turn, should realize measurable benefits like reduced operational costs from that new efficiency, which, at the end of the day, create organizational value. Increase market share, a sustained competitive advantage, something tangible.
The governance implication there is huge. Success is no longer measured when a project closes and someone signs off. It requires measuring that value months later, and it shifts that long-term accountability squarely onto the product owner, who's tied to the product lifecycle.
Exactly. And that demands a governance shift away from classic project governance steering committees focused only on compliance and RAG status reports.
Red, amber, green, which only tells you if the execution is on track, not if it's the right track.
Right. And you shift to product governance. This uses things like quarterly business reviews or QBRs, which focus on strategic outcomes and market fit.
And the financial change is the most radical part of this whole thing. We're moving from the rigidity of CapEx, or annual project funding, to value stream funding. Traditional CapEx funded a specific scope, and it promoted that notorious spend it or lose it mentality.
Oh, that mentality was so destructive. If you had $5 million budgeted for a project, the incentive was to spend all $5 million. Even if you realized 3 months in that the scope was wrong, you spent it because you risk having your budget cut next year if you underspent. Value stream funding completely destroys that incentive. It allocates the capacity, the run rate of a persistent team.
So the funding is tied to the team, not the scope.
Exactly. That's the strategic leverage. It gives the product owner the autonomy to pivot and prioritize immediately when the market shifts, in days, not months. It supports continuous investment without those violent boom and bust cycles of project hiring and firing. And this structure also helps us define those modern roles. The product manager on the what and why, the project manager on the how and when, and the value stream owner on the P&L and strategy.
And it highlights the evolution of the PMO into a VMO, a value management office. So they move beyond just tracking milestones and now focus on managing that continuous flow of funding and coaching the organization on these agile practices.
That's the evolution.
So if the new system focuses on value, then we have to change what we measure. The final necessary shift is moving away from output-focused vanity metrics, things like lines of code or some arbitrary percentage complete. We have to move to strategic impact metrics. And this is the key insight. We really need 2 stacks of metrics, one for the internal engine and one for the external market.
First, we have flow metrics. These measure the internal delivery engine, the speed and health of the product development life cycle, the PDLC. These tell us if the team is operating efficiently.
And the flow framework identifies a few key components here. Flow time is critical, isn't it? That's the total time from when an idea is accepted to its release in production. It shows exactly how fast we can learn. But the real strategic lever is flow distribution.
Flow distribution is a management decision, a conscious one. It's the strategic ratio of work allocated across 4 types: features, defects, risk, and debt work. If features are what's driving the car forward, then defects and debt are the engine oil and brake maintenance you absolutely must pay for to keep the car running safely.
And if your organization is stuck in that feature factory trap where you spend 90% of your time on new features and you neglect debt and defects,
You are accumulating major technical liability and you are slowing down your future flow time. That metric forces a strategic conversation about how you allocate your capacity.
Okay, so then we shift to the second stack, product success metrics. These measure market impact, the health of the larger product lifecycle, the PLC, These are outward-facing and customer-centric.
For growth stage products, we often see AARR or pirate metrics. That's acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. They're heavily focused on user growth and monetization.
But for more mature products where growth isn't the primary goal, maybe satisfaction and stability are, then we turn to HEART metrics.
Right. HEART stands for happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. This suite is often better for internal platforms or enterprise tools. The focus there is on maximizing user efficiency, not necessarily driving new sales.
And the ultimate insight here, the truly integrated view, is how you connect these two stacks. It's that continuous feedback loop defined in the PMBOK 7th edition.
Precisely. Governance uses the external product metrics. For example, if AOR shows user retention is dangerously low, to strategically adjust the flow distribution for the teams. Low retention might mean the team has to strategically stop delivering new features. They need to prioritize defect reduction, quality enhancement, and technical debt repayment until that product stabilizes. It forces strategic, continuous improvement.
So, to summarize this deep dive, understanding the modern PMP standard really hinges on separating these three life cycles: the tactical project life cycle, the continuous product development life cycle, and the strategic product life cycle. They are not the same thing. We have to recognize that shift from fixed project scope to flexible product scope, and the necessity of measuring outcomes and strategic benefits via PMBOK 7's system for value delivery.
The shift is not the elimination of project management. It is its evolution into a strategic support function. The project lifecycle remains a vital tactical gear, a specialized tool that's incredibly useful for temporary, bounded, high-risk work like achieving regulatory compliance. But that gear must now operate within the larger, continuous machine of the product lifecycle.
So the product model gives context and purpose to the project. It turns the project manager into a strategic partner, not just a siloed implementer.
Exactly. Now consider your own organization, whether you're working with software, internal services, or even external platforms. What essential ongoing services are you currently treating as a temporary project? Because by doing that, you are inadvertently funding knowledge loss, you're creating resource discontinuity, and you're accumulating technical debt that the organization must eventually pay interest on. This shift is fundamentally about transforming those temporary endeavors into sustained systems for organizational worth. That's the real value of product thinking.